want to talk about grief a bit. So I've lost a number of, like I mentioned, close friends and a mentor in the last 12 months. And you mentioned your husband who passed away earlier. And if I get any facts wrong, obviously, please correct me. But colorectal cancer, 42. I'm 40, which really caught my attention. And the first time I had an opportunity to go abroad outside of the United States was to Japan as an exchange student. And I lived with a family, went to a Japanese high school, and I'm still close to that family 25 years later. And the father in that host family is my second father, effectively. And I planned on bringing my American family to Japan later this year to meet them for the first time, my two families. And I just found out that my host father is in the hospital, late stage, very aggressive cancer, diagnosed as metastasized, probably will pass away in the next 2 months. And
what kind of cancer?
I would have to go back to the email because it was very emotional and then cognitively difficult for me to translate because it was a lot. It's in Japanese and it was all specialized medical terminology. But it's in the lung, it's in the liver. Lifelong smoker, very typical for Japanese of that age. I think it might be also esophageal. So this has had me thinking about grief, and is there anything I should do in advance to prepare for that? And I'd just be very curious if you're willing to talk about it, to describe your experience of grieving. And you could start at any point in time, but as it relates to your experience with your husband, and certainly after that we can get into it. But I mean, you've done a tremendous job of highlighting the types of diagnostic tools and preventative tools that people can use, which we'll talk about. But I don't even know how to think about grief. I mean, I don't know if I've allowed myself to ever experience it before, but I know I'm going to be hit with a hammer.
I thought, though, you had a couple of friends and a mentor.
Did. No, I did. They have passed away. And it's been very recent that it hasn't been this close. Like these are friends, but they're not a second father to me. And I think in a sense, the mentor who passed away did hit me pretty hard, but I've only in the last 6 to 12 months actually been allowing myself to feel more things. That's a much longer story, but I've had a lot.
You have a kind of conflicted relationship with this person?
No, I've had a lot of armor for decades that I've built up over time for a lot of different reasons. And it's been very useful for some things, for protecting me, but I've realized that it also keeps a lot in that is very ultimately corrosive. So I'm trying to develop more of an ability to feel instead of looking at it as a liability.
Gosh, I don't know. How do you describe grief? I mean, I can talk a little bit about my personal experience. You know, I was on top of the world, had this great job, had 2 beautiful children, and of course, a wonderful husband. I have to say we were having some challenges in our marriage, because I think I had this just sort of out of the blue success and suddenly became a household name and had all this attention, which I think can put a lot of pressure on a relationship, where suddenly it doesn't feel, the power dynamic doesn't feel as equal.
Right.
But, you know, we were really, you know, in love and enjoying our lives, and, you know, just out of the blue, Jay hadn't been feeling well. He had been tired. He'd been traveling, and we kept thinking, you know, we have 2 little kids. He's covering the O.J. Simpson trial. He was, you know, his schedule was crazy. And then out of the blue, he just was doubled over in pain. And our nanny, who was Irish at the time, called and said, Jay's doubled over in pain, and I don't know what to do. So he didn't have a doctor, like so many young men, which is, you know, if anybody there are many, I think, takeaways from our conversation, I hope. But one is that men, especially, I think because women go see gynecologists, honestly, that a lot of men don't go and get physicals, or they don't even have a GP or an internist. And Jay was one of those guys. He played lacrosse and football and college, and was, never smoked ever. I don't think he ever even tried a cigarette. I don't think he even tried pot ever. It's sort of crazy when you think about it. Drank moderately, took pretty good care of himself. I mean, and it just boom. He had stage 4 metastatic colon cancer. So we went from one day, just everything was great. We were buying a house in the country or had a house in the country, and we're really enjoying that. And Jay was riding horses in Central Park and doing his thing professionally. And I was at the Today Show, and our girls were great. And Carrie was less than a year at the time, or just had turned a year old when he was diagnosed on April 3rd, 1997, sorry. He died 9 months later in January. But, it's so debilitating and shattering and destabilizing. And, it's such a process. And I was in such denial. And he was one of these very smart people, but he didn't want to know about his health. He didn't want to know the gory details. I don't know why, because he was so smart, intellectually curious and interested, and I don't know, maybe he knew. So I kept all this stuff from him, which I really regret. I would say, there's only shadows on your liver. Don't worry, it's going to be okay. We're going to figure it out. I remember sending his scans to NIH, because I had a lot of connections because of my job.
Right.
And I remember very prominent cancer scientists calling me and saying, "Oh God, this is really bad." I arranged for him to get a hepatic artery pump, which pushed the chemo directly to his liver that was covered. I mean, the tumor burden on his liver was awful. And anyway, so I went into, I think my husband, John, says I'm very good in an emergency. I get very focused and very proactive and driven. And I went into, I am going to try to fix this mode. And so I was sort of doing that, I think, to avoid the grief, because I had to do something.
Right.
And it was just, what can I say? It's the worst thing in the world to see someone, first of all, your life just changed in an instant, then to see someone suffering, then to try to figure out how can you help somebody. It's really overwhelming. And, I think my grieving process began the day he was diagnosed, because my doctor, who was the internist Jay went to see when he was in this pain, he pulled me aside into one of those little patient rooms in the hospital and said, this is really bad. The prognosis is very bleak. So what do you do with that except for do everything you possibly can to change the outcome, which you realize you probably can't change. Anyway, It's a very challenging thing to deal with, but maybe my regrets will help you with your situation, in that I never really said to Jay, what are your hopes and dreams for your kids? Can you write the girls a letter? Can we videotape you talking to them? To say everything I wanted to say to him, because that was an acknowledgement that he was going to die, and I just couldn't do that. So maybe if things are so bleak for this person is so special to you, first of all, you need to tell him.
Yeah.
And you need to write him, maybe go see him, and feel that you don't have any regrets.
Thank you.